In a quiet, forgotten town nestled between the mountains, there stood an old, decrepit house known by the locals as the Whispering House. For generations, no one dared to approach it as strange rumors had surrounded it. They said the house was alive, haunted by a vengeful spirit, and that it whispered the darkest secrets to anyone who entered. One evening, a young journalist named Rachel arrived in town. She had heard about the eerie house and was determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. Armed with a flashlight and a notepad, she approached the house at dusk, the air thick with tension. The windows were dark and cracked, and the front door creaked in the wind. Rachel hesitated, but then steeled herself. "It's just a house," she muttered under her breath, stepping forward. As she entered, the door slammed shut behind her, almost as if the house had accepted her presence. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet, and the air was heavy, stale with the scent of decay. It was too quiet, almost unnatural, as though the house itself was waiting. Rachel explored the rooms, each one darker and more oppressive than the last. She could feel eyes watching her from the corners, but when she turned, there was nothing. In the farthest room, she found a dusty old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. As she approached, she noticed something strange in the reflection. A shadowy figure standing behind her. Heart racing, she spun around, but the room was empty. She shrugged it off as a trick of the light, but as she turned back to the mirror, the figure in the reflection moved. Slowly, it stepped forward, its face obscured by darkness. Panic surged through Rachel's chest as she backed away, only to hear a soft whisper in her ear. "Leave. Or suffer." Frozen with fear, she glanced around, but no one was there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the walls themselves were speaking. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered. Her flashlight blinked and then went out completely. She fumbled to turn it back on, but as she did, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, inches from her face. Suddenly, the whispers became clearer. "You should not have come here." Rachel screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. The house seemed to have trapped her. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the shadows around her thickened, swirling like a storm. The temperature dropped, her breath visible in the freezing air. She could hear the footsteps now, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. Desperately, Rachel searched for another way out, but all the windows were barred shut. As she turned back to the hallway, she saw the figure again, this time much closer, its face now illuminated by the dim light. It was a woman, her eyes hollow, her mouth stretched in a twisted grin. "Why are you here?" the figure hissed, her voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed in Rachel's mind. The woman stepped closer, her fingers like ice as they grazed Rachel's skin. "I waited for someone like you. Someone who couldn't resist the call of the house." Rachel tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The woman's cold hand clasped Rachel's wrist, dragging her deeper into the house. The walls seemed to close in, their surfaces pulsing, as if alive. The floorboards shifted beneath her feet, and suddenly Rachel was no longer in the house. She found herself standing in a dark void, the whispers now deafening, surrounding her from every direction. The woman's voice echoed in her ears. "Now, you belong to me." Rachel's body trembled as she felt the house wrap around her, its walls pressing in, its shadows pulling her in. She realized with horror that the house didn't just haunt people, it consumed them. And now she was part of it. The next morning, the townsfolk found Rachel's notebook near the house's front door, its pages torn and stained with ink. There was one last entry, barely readable. "The house, it never lets go. The whispers, they never stop. I can hear them calling, 'Please, don't come here.'" And so the house continued to wait, its whispers calling to the next soul, brave or foolish enough to enter.